I want to call the panel up on stage who are going to discuss one of the biggest challenges facing social entrepreneurship. So I will sit over here, and if the panel will all come out, I will introduce them. So come up on stage. So on Saturday, I was early in Munich and went to an event called the Ashoka Globalizer. Anyone that's read my book, Philanthrocapitalism, will know about the role that social entrepreneurs are playing in helping to sort of bring about a much more efficient and dramatic process of social change, social innovation. But one of the big challenges that social entrepreneurs face is how do they get from having a great idea to having a great impact. That very often the idea is brilliant at a small scale, but then in contrast to the private sector where you very quickly have all sorts of investors coming around and advisors telling you how to make it big. In the social entrepreneurship world, ideas often stay at a relatively small scale, and so the challenge that social entrepreneurs wrestle with is how to scale up. And the idea of the globalizer that Ashoka had, which I'm going to ask Konstanze Frischen to talk about in a moment, is to take the best social entrepreneurs that Ashoka has, and Ashoka, as you may well know, was an organization founded by Bill Drayton, who's really the father of social entrepreneurship, to be a network to build and support social entrepreneurs around the world. The idea of globalizer is to take the most effective social entrepreneurial ideas and models and figure out how do you take them global from one country to a lot of countries quickly. And they brought together a group of great social entrepreneurs and a group of great mentors and advisors and people who are successful business people to brainstorm that topic. And that's how Saturday was spent, and it was a very fascinating experience. And I'm hoping the panel are going to give us some sense of the lessons that were learned from that and a few ideas about how anyone that's a social entrepreneur can think about scaling up what they're doing. I'm just going to very quickly go down the panel so you know who's speaking. Immediately to my right is Rodrigo Baggio, who runs... Baggio. I'm thinking of the Italian footballer, that's the trouble. So it's, and your organization is focused on change through digital inclusion, founded quite a while ago in Brazil, and already achieved a considerable international impact. Konstanze Frischen is next. She runs Ashoka in Germany and came up with one of the people responsible for the idea of the globalizer. We then have Fenton, who runs an organization called Couch Surfing, which he's going to explain a bit more about in a moment, but it's a kind of international getting to know each other sort of service, which he'll tell us all about. And then Frank Rosenberger from Vodafone Foundation, which is sponsor of the Globalizer, and also as a foundation was responsible for the real innovations of M-Pesa in Kenya, which is one of the great examples of corporate social responsibility, partnering with a government ministry and producing something that's a revolution in mobile payments and development. And finally, last but not least, we have Naif, who is the great cartoonist and entrepreneur behind the 99, which is a group of cartoon superheroes that reflect the 99 attributes of Allah under Islam, and among other things, has recently formed a partnership with various American superheroes, including Batman and Superman, to form a united superhero front across the religions to fight extremism. And also has a theme park associated with that in Kuwait, and business partnerships with all sorts of interesting companies. And so, and probably various religious extremists denouncing you, both in America and in other parts of the world. So a great panel. I'm going to start briefly with Konstanze just to talk about why did Ashoka create this idea of the globalizer, and what have you achieved so far with it, do you think?
Thank you, Matthew. So there are a variety of reasons, but maybe I can shed light on the two most important reasons. I mean, in the business sector, how great ideas travel the globe. And my favorite example always is that I'm using contact lenses. I have no idea who invented them, who brought them to market first, but I can buy them whenever I need, and they make my life easier, because without them I just wouldn't be able to see you. So in the social sector, we have great social innovations thought up by social entrepreneurs, and way too often they are stuck, you know, in a country, in a region, sometimes even in a village. So that is obviously not a good idea. I mean, for a variety of reasons. What works in rural India can also be helpful in rural Africa. What works in Rio de Janeiro can be useful in Berlin. So there should be an exchange of ideas. And also, in addition to that, you know, when you think, like, do you guys all, are you all familiar with what a social entrepreneur is? More or less?
Yeah, show of hands,
nodding in the
social
audience?
entrepreneur is. That's pretty good. So the word
right,
is
so it seems
out.
pretty, you know, someone who's trying to solve a social, a societal problem, thinking and acting like an entrepreneur, not pursuing a for-profit motive necessarily, but the goal is really to change that social problem. So, you know, and so since the goal is to change that social problem, you really want to exploit your market potential. So you have to think of how can you spread your idea. And so that was the reason why we came up with the idea of, okay, let's do a globalizer. Let's try and find, you know, the brilliant minds in the private sector, entrepreneurs who've gone global, who have, you know, tons of experience in scaling and bringing things to other countries. And let's, you know, put them in a room together with our social entrepreneurs, and let's together figure out the right scaling strategies for them.
Great, and I mean, I think one of the things you were saying to me beforehand, which you told me not to repeat, was that, I mean, part of the problem is that when people say who's a global social entrepreneur, the only one anyone can ever think of is Muhammad Yunus. And really one of the goals is to produce dozens more people who we can immediately refer to as sort of the faces of social entrepreneurship. Now, Roberto, you could, oh, also Rodrigo.
Roberto Baggio is my cousin.
Yeah, he is. He's a brilliant footballer. He is a brilliant footballer. He is a brilliant footballer. So Rodrigo Baggio, I mean, you are one of those people, because you've actually been at this social entrepreneurship work. You were pretty early in the Ashoka Fellowship, and you've actually started to go to a number of other countries. So you just talk a bit about, you know, as a social entrepreneur, just briefly what you do, but then how you went about thinking about scaling and what the challenges and obstacles you ran into were.
Right. I started my organization 16 years ago in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. CDI, Change Through Digital Inclusion. So our mission is using technology to transforming lives and developing low-income communities. So we our first pilot was in 1995 in Rio de Janeiro on March. And we create a model, technology center, self-sustainable and self-managed, in partnership with a community social entrepreneur. And we started that pilot before internet was open in the Brazilian society. So we didn't have demand for low-income people or using technology or using internet. So we started, and we saw amazing demand for young poor people. More than 300 people was in the line want to learn about technology and civic engagement education. And we start to building our model. So self-sustainable and self-managed, but also apply a pedagogical methodology focus in graduate change agents. So in our 5 steps methodology, we training local people in software. We have more than 30 courses, micro-enterprise, service. We train local people to understand better their reality, to find a problem, a challenge, to use technology to do a project to impact that problem, that reality. We stimulate them, go to action, and evaluate the process. So let me give you an example. In one of our schools in São Paulo, in the first day of the class, 10 young people was in the community with mobile phone, digital cameras, and they interview the older people. They take photos about the problems, the challenge, and then they came back and share all of this information. And together they decided. 2 of these guys take photo about big rats. They are so impressive about that. So they realize about in that community that is a big challenge, the rats, because transmit disease, etc. So they start learning how to use...
New York, was it? No. No. Not in New York, no.
No. But they start to learn how to use the internet, and they did a research, and they realize about the challenge. It's not the rats, but the fact about the community people not organize the garbage. So, and then they began to learn about text editor, PowerPoint, and they did folders, flyers, they did speech there, and in 4 months, 100% of the community people start to organize their garbage, and then the rats disappear. So 10 young people changed the awareness in their community. So this first CDI community center was really very successful, and now we have 822 of our CDI community centers in 13 countries. So more than 1.3 million people have been trained in technology and civic engagement education through our CDI community centers.
Okay, well, we'll come back and talk in a moment about, you wanted to come in, Konstanze.
Yeah, just wanted to say one thing. You know, Rodrigo Baggio was one of the first social entrepreneurs I ever met when I started Ashoka. And so, you know, I remember we talked about why did you come up with this idea? And Rodrigo said, well, when I would ask favela children what they want to be in life when they grow up, they would always say drug dealer, you know, because drug dealer, I mean, they have drugs, money, women, and guns. So really technology was a very powerful means to compete with drugs and guns. And you know, this is part of the reason why with this Ashoka Globalizer, we are focusing on technology, because it's not only an instrument to reach global scale more easily, but also a very powerful tool for you know, integration, inclusion, and a more peaceful world.
Great. Casey, Fenton now. Tell us a bit about couch surfing.
Sure. Well, Couchsurfing, for those of you who don't know, is a social network. It's about 3.5 million people, pretty much every place you could imagine in the world. And these are people who are very curious about exploring the world and connecting with people. They're really focused on having deep and meaningful connections with people and places that they're connecting with. So it's not just about traveling and saving money, although you can save money while you're couchsurfing because you're staying with people in their houses for cultural exchange. The focus is really on those experiences and meeting people that could be, you know, life-changing, potentially, hopefully life-changing experiences. And it's really about kind of filling in some of those places in your perspective that you might not even be, you might not even realize you don't even know about. It's like the places you don't even know you don't know. And by couchsurfing, you start to fill in these little spots, and gives you much more perspective, deeper perspective on life, and probably deeper appreciation for the world, all that stuff.
And your goal is to promote that kind of mutual international understanding, is it?
That's right. Our social mission is to promote cultural exchange in a sense, and ultimately appreciation of diversity. It's not just enough to tolerate diversity. We want people to appreciate the fact, oh, you're really different than I am. That's good.
Great. I'm going to ask Naif as well, because I mean, you're really a social entrepreneur as well as a businessman, aren't you? Just tell us briefly about, you know, what's been going on with the 99.
Sure, sure. So my background is I'm a clinical psychologist. I trained at Bellevue Hospital in the Survivors of Political Torture program. So I worked with people from Arab prisons, but there were people there from all over the world. I just didn't speak the other languages. And heard one too many times the story of people growing up to idolize their leaders as heroes only to be tortured by them. Took a break. It was a pretty intense experience. Went to business school and decided that I was going to create those alternative role models for kids in my part of the world. I'm the father of 5 young boys, and decided to, so as a psychologist, my work had to do with perception, how people saw themselves, how they're seen by others, and somewhere in the middle you do your work. Well, I wasn't happy with how Islam was being seen by the West. I wasn't happy with how the West saw Islam. But more importantly for me and for my children, I wasn't happy with how Islam was seeing itself. And that's where I wanted to make a change. And what I sold to my investors was this. I said, the only way to beat extremism is through arts and culture. That's what happened in Europe, and that's what has to happen in our part of the world. And the idea being to take content that already exists, the religious content, secularize it, and create positive messages that are universal in nature, but are still attributable to the same place. And so that translated into the 99, which, contrary to belief, did not occupy Wall Street. But my 99 are basically superheroes. They're from 99 different countries. They work together in teams of 3 to solve problems. It never matters what country you're from or what religion you have. We don't discuss any of that. We don't discuss anybody's religion. It's basically, here's the problem at hand, and does your power help you solve that problem at hand? That's how they navigate each other's differences. We started as a comic book series done by the same people who do Spider-Man and Batman and X-Men, etc. The theme park opened in Kuwait 3 years ago. The TV series is a joint venture with Endemol. That series was written in Hollywood by the writers behind Star Wars and Batman and Ben 10. We sold it internationally. Cartoon Network picked it up in some territories, Discovery Network in others, ABC, Public TV in Australia, Middle East, North Africa, and it's coming out globally this year. And one fun thing we got to do is last year a new series was launched by DC Comics that have our characters standing cape to shoulder working with Batman and Superman and a Wonder Woman who wore clothes for the first time in 65 years. So.
Not a hijab, though, I hope, no. Anyway, so Vodafone. Why are you interested in Ashoka? What's the relationship about for you?
Yeah, I think when we remember what we have just seen before we started here, our round about abundance, can we really imagine what we would do without communication, without a mobile phone, or without a bank account? And that's actually something when I remember when I started something like 15 years ago, when I talked to people in Egypt, you need actually to put $1,000 on the table before you're even being obliged actually to get a mobile phone in that country. This does not mean that you then have a mobile phone. This needs to be purchased on top of that. So this was a very, very elite thing. So I think over what we have had, and this was a kind of a vision, of course, driven on the one side by a kind of a commercial aspect, but on the other side also by the kind of understanding that communication can make a significant change to significantly help to build networks in those countries and to bring costs for mobile dramatically down. And in 2000, we started a program actually to have the first mobile phone for something like $10 US, which we achieved in a couple of years and later. And when you look into how strong this have been growing then in those countries, and we know now by World Bank that every 10% of penetration gives actually 1% of additional wealth to these countries, of additional annual growth. So therefore, when we cross something like 30, 40, 50% penetration, that gives those countries 4 or 5% additional annual growth. And I think that's actually what we try now here to leverage, and where we see huge opportunities, either by educating those people, bringing things forward to them, so to actually show them what it actually means. And I think we have seen that, for example, in Turkey, but also in Kenya, when a farmer actually if you have produced some goods and you are able to pre-negotiate with the market a price, you can achieve 2-3 times higher revenues for the stuff which you have produced than when you just travel there. And of course, when you then start actually to make some money, there was also a question for many, many people, they don't have a bank account. And this was some of the programs which we started almost like you guys here started, where we had a group of students in the university in the UK, and they started to think about how can we actually, we as a mobile network, provide people with bank accounts. And this was a moment when M-Pesa had been created as an idea, then brought to Kenya, and by now, almost 10% of the local Kenyan GDP is actually supported by M-Pesa. And this is a huge, huge change for the people, because imagine before, if you want to transfer money to somebody else, you don't have a bank account, you typically give it to the bus driver. Yeah, and I can tell you that the bus drivers had been maybe much more reliable than the bus drivers we have sometimes in Europe. So imagine you would go out to the bus driver and say, well, can you please actually give that money ahead? And this was a kind of a traditional scheme of how money had been handled. So therefore, I think this is a foundation. And now we have these approaches built on that. And we started to think about how much change actually the technology will provide, that people can get access to the internet, to the society. And this is something we try to support with our Vodafone Institute. And we think that Akosha is a good tool, actually, to identify ideas, to promote them and bring them forward.
Great. So, Rodrigo, let's turn to this question of scaling up and the practicalities of it. as you thought about how you were going to take your training centers to other countries, what were the challenges that you saw that you had to address and answer to scale up?
I think the first challenge is replicate with quality. And in 1998, we start in Brazil. We hired the biggest consultant in franchising. And we create a new concept about social franchising. And we began to, for us, social franchising is the way to replicate with quality. And if we teach well the step-by-step, the process to start one CDI community center, how follow up, evaluate the impact, and things like that. So then is the customization, is the adaptation, because our first replication was in Brazil, in another Brazilian state, but also in different fields. So indigenous village, juvenile centers, prison, we start our schools for mentally disabled, physical disabled, blind, and poor. And then when we start to replicate in another countries, also the adaptation is really very important. The last one was 1 year ago in the UK. So we start CDI in the UK, in London, with the goal to fundraising in benefit of our network in Latin America. But foundations in the UK began to ask us to adapt our methodology there. We are so surprised about that. But we did a feasibility study, and then we start what we call CDI Apps for Good. So now we have 40 CDI Apps for Good centers in 40 government schools in all of the country, training local people, young people between 14 and 18 years old, how to design applications for smartphone to impact and develop their reality. So, that's important.
So I can see what you did, but what were the factors that have slowed you down so that you're not even, I guess you were created before Google was created and before Facebook was created, and Facebook has, nearly 1 billion people using it. And how does a social entrepreneur ever think about achieving that kind of scale of impact that you see with something like a Google or a Facebook? I mean, are there things that could be done differently that would enable you to grow 10 times, 100 times as fast as you have done?
Yeah, that's really a challenge. I think the most successful and scalable field in the social entrepreneurs field are the microcredit. But if you put together all, and what Muhammad Yunus did was an important thing because he grew with his organization, but he inspired other people. So Bill Drayton, the Ashoka founder, he says all the time, the most important result of a social entrepreneur is not the directly numbers of their work, their project, but the capacity to inspire the society to do and replicate the same. For that reason, create solutions like open source. So one social entrepreneur could create some idea and then become to be a public policy. So that happened, for example, in Brazil, because only 5 years after we start our organization, Brazil began to develop public policy in terms of digital inclusion. So inspiration, the society, and create open source strategies.
Great. Now, Casey, with your model, I guess you had to be global from the start, otherwise there's not much point.
Yeah, we had to be global from the start, absolutely. It's a website, after all. But I think a lot of our challenge is really, and when you're trying to scale, you're trying to gather together resources, ideas, people, all of these different things, stakeholders, and create great alignment between them. And when you have that great alignment, then there's a lot of synergy and things really go, and you can scale. Part of the problem that we had in the very beginning is we actually started off as a nonprofit. And we've just recently converted to a B Corp and a sister charity. But in that process before, we had some misalignment specific to our model. And we were only allowed to, being a nonprofit charity, 501c3, or seeking 501c3, we were only allowed to take donations, essentially. We couldn't do things that would produce a larger amount of revenue. And when you're trying to create a complex social network, it requires a lot of technology. It requires a lot of very smart people working very hard day in and day out. And so we put together, we tried many different configurations. We had collectives around the world where people were living together in Alaska and Thailand and all over the place. And that was, for the resources we had, the best model that we could kind of afford. And now being a B Corp, we are a social enterprise. So now we can choose all kinds of revenue models to maximize our impact and create more alignment between all kinds of stakeholders. So we've really, I think, been much closer to achieving greater impact and scaling with the help and the ideas of Ashoka and being able to have access to the great minds and yeah. So.
I'm interesting with Vodafone. You know, even with M-Pesa, I mean, there was an initial reluctance on Vodafone's part to really scale that up, and DFID, the British government aid agency, which was initially involved in the project, sort of wasn't putting more money up. So, I mean, in the end, you actually spun it off as a sort of private for-profit operation, I guess. And I wonder to what extent that is the, what lessons you've learned from that experience for other social entrepreneurs as they're doing their initiatives and trying to scale up.
I think the first thing is it was really something which was urgently needed. Yeah, so therefore, and I think this is maybe the first lesson every entrepreneur will learn, yeah, regardless if you're for profit or if you're social. Yeah, and the more need is for what you do, the higher actually your return will be. And that return could be in terms of honor, that return could be in terms of emotions, and that return could be in form of money. And the other thing is then, there is typically, I think, of course, when you scale up a question in terms of how can you do that, and scaling up even for a company like Vodafone sometimes is a challenge. Yeah, and so M-Pesa is now in Africa, so we have it in Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, go to Ghana, and when we are now starting in India, where we have similar issues in the society, it's, of course, you're in a because you're going into the banking environment, and this is a kind of a heavily regulated environment, almost more regulated like telecoms. And so therefore, I think you're dealing then very, very quickly with things you, at least at the very, very beginning, you never had thought about dealing with it. And that's, I think, the second thing. When you are becoming more and more relevant, you need to deal with different things, yeah, in terms of having more responsibility, and how do you scale that up, and how do you get that out of a corner and make it really kind of an essential facility for society. And I really like everything, but when I, for example, think what Casey does, it's actually reverting a little bit the idea of bringing everything to the internet and say, well, yes, you have a kind of a digital life, but let's see if the reality is actually matching that, and let's also work on some real experiences.
I mean, it's interesting. I remember interviewing your predecessor, one of your predecessors at Vodafone, and saying, well, you know, M-Pesa seems to be working quite well. Why don't you scale it up and become a bank? And the look of horror on his face, he said, well, you know, this would be a regulatory nightmare where, you know, telecoms is difficult enough. And it has been clear that, you know, although M-Pesa's worked very well in Kenya, the regulations around banking around the world are a huge impediment to this great innovation taking off. And I mean, have you found you know, ways of building a movement to change regulations in that way?
I think that's a tough one. Yeah, change regulation. Yeah, because the interests are not always aligned. So therefore, I think for us it's more important to think about, so we know that there is a huge benefit, so how can we actually find a way then maybe with banks, with other partners which are necessary to move ahead. Yeah, so it's rather kind of a very pragmatic approach going forward, rather than saying, well, we will wait or we will lobbying until regulation has changed. Because the problem for the people is today.
Rodrigo, you managed to get the Brazilian government interested in your initiatives. Did you set out deliberately to say, well, look, the only way we can really leverage up and scale this organization is to get government to replicate it? And what techniques work to changing government policy?
It's very complicated work with government. It's necessary, but it's complicated. It's easier work with companies and foundations. But we need, as a social entrepreneurs, as a citizens, work with government, help them doing well what they need to do, and co-create things. So we inspire government in Brazil, and they began to implement public policy, and we interact many times and help them create a best initiative. The challenge is when you work with government is they work focus in the next election, you know, and that's something and we try to do things with continuity. But it's really important, the partnership cross-sector.
Now, Naif, as you talked to all these different social entrepreneurs on Saturday, what were you hearing about what the common patterns were as people were struggling with how do we scale, how do we globalize our ideas?
Each one was unique in what was what their challenge was. I think part of it had to do with just kind of, for some it was they had the resources available to them in terms of what they needed, but it's a matter of somebody kind of saying, hey, have you tried this? Have you thought of this? For others, it was about looking at their same business in a different way. I mean, the saying that 2 heads are better than 1. Well, they had 3 extra heads in there, kind of helping them think through stuff. So I think a lot of what I felt I did anyway was not teach them anything new. It was more, I mean, I learned more than I taught, but I think what I was able to do was kind of shine light on stuff that maybe they said in passing and say, let's talk about that for a little bit more. And then they're capable of kind of connecting the dots in a different way and rearranging it and coming up with something new. So it's been more of that, less of kind of...
And what sort of problems were people having?
Everything from kind of, when you're an entrepreneur and on the one end you're surviving, it's not a sustainable business, and the other you have to try to make it work, you kind of try to go and become as opportunistic as possible. And I saw that in quite a few different ventures where kind of it all made sense because it was, you were working and there was revenue and stuff, but the idea of kind of scale was the issue, and that's what the meetings were about. So have we gotten as much as we can from this product? Have we been able to use this system in enough places for us to start thinking about other systems? So that was kind of but the whole meeting was about those issues.
Konstanze, what did you hear in your feedback from the discussions? Were there any common themes that you detected?
Yeah, I mean, even before, one thing we know for sure, I mean, there are no textbooks on how you scale great social ideas. So that is part of the reason why we had really brilliant business entrepreneurs there, like Esther Dyson and Lars Hinrichs were 2 of them, just to mention a few. You have Naif here on stage. So, and the other thing is truly like there is no functioning infrastructure out there that supports social entrepreneurs. Ashoka, I mean, what we do is we source for the best social innovations with the best brilliant entrepreneurial minds behind them, and we do support them with financial means, with resources, with networks, with access to companies, to legal pro bono advice, to consulting advice, and so on. But still, this is not enough. We are not an industry. So also in the field of technology, what we realized during the globalizer, I mean, there are many aspects where the field really needs help. For example, communication technology, digital technology gets outdated very fast. I mean, whom am I telling that? So, can there be a consortium of companies, of entrepreneurs who are providing their services or their expertise for free, to vetted social entrepreneurs at a certain moment in time. So you don't have to hire, for a lot of money your own programmers, but you can really tap into the expertise that rests with companies who do their core business, and by doing that, leverage great social innovations.
Great. Now, Casey, I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned B Corps, which is the new sort of hot phenomena in corporate structure in America, which is this sort of idea of a company that has a social purpose, and companies, the law's just been passed in California to allow it, and so forth. What was behind your decision to switch and become a B Corp from a straight non-profit?
Sure. From the very beginning, the goal of Couchsurfing has always been a social one. So we want to really preserve that core goal. And we actually, long story, but we fought with the IRS for a long time trying to get 501c3 status. In the end, they said, we think you're like a Facebook, and we're not going to have it. So we said, all right. So we ended up having to convert, and we didn't want to convert into just a regular for-profit. We really wanted to convert into something that would have that kind of that social value, that wouldn't be afraid to build a sustainable system and scale, and that could scale, but they would also keep that social mission. So I think B Corp is really good for that. You could take into the multiple stakeholders, multiple bottom lines, take everyone into account instead of just going for profit and profit alone as your only measurement. So,
I suppose you could look at what you're trying to do and say it's not all that different from Airbnb or something of that kind, where basically people are going online and using other people's houses, and I guess that's a sort of social purpose. And they've gone for a straight for-profit model. And I guess it is increasingly fashionable among social entrepreneurs to say, actually, the quickest way to scale up is to just develop a profitable model and be done with it. Why didn't you go the whole hog and do that?
Well, I think we are a little bit different from Airbnb in that Airbnb is clearly, it's about space. It's about if you have some extra space and you'd like to get some money, well, hey, let's do this exchange. It's about a sharing economy concepts. But Couchsurfing is a bit different. It's really about people and experiences. And it's really about life-changing experiences. And so we just want to keep that social cause in there. And there's a lot of altruism that goes with offering your space and your home and your life to someone. And we feel that making sure that our business model matches kind of that altruistic heart is really important, because I think people would be less likely to want to open their homes if they feel like that our business model doesn't even kind of match what their feeling is.
And Konstanze?
Just to add something on that point, I mean, if you just say, I want to scale up, grow like a for-profit, and then I'm done with my mission, I think that's, really cutting it short, because, as I said before, if you think there are 180 countries where your ideas could be powerfully, replicated, then, it would surely take you a while to get there to those 180 countries, and so that while, may cost lives. So you really want to see how you actually create healthy competition, or copycats, or how you can replicate your idea with quality, whether it's by you yourself or whether it's by others.
But I mean, Naif, you've gone for a straight for-profit model, haven't you? Why do you feel that imperils your mission in some way, or?
Well, for me, no, I don't, because for me, I was a psychologist for many years. I spent 10 years being billed out by hospitals and not seeing a penny from it because I was in training. And so when I went to business school and came out, for me to go into business for business's sake, I mean, I respect people who do that. I just couldn't do that. But at the same time, I have these young boys, and I wanted to be able to, if I could create something that they could benefit from in the future, I wanted to make sure that they were the beneficiaries of that. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. Like, I knew myself. I knew that that's not what I wanted to do. And so I went in that space. And then 2 years later, 2 years ago, I opened what's become the region's largest mental health practice. Also a social entrepreneurial, we do a lot of pro bono stuff, but we have 27 psychologists now. And the way I did that, there was a problem I needed to solve. The laws in Kuwait, the regulations were terrible. The government's been trying for years to change stuff, couldn't do it. And so the best way to go about it, I thought, let me solve this by creating the best clinic in Kuwait and force other people to go out of business or change. And within 2 years, the ministry has changed their laws. And so I think, and again, that could have been a not-for-profit, but for me, it was important for it to be a for-profit.
Rodrigo, yes.
But it's important remember about one of the most important innovation in the social entrepreneurs field is exactly the social business. That kind of hybrid organizations will be one of the trends in the future. One challenge is laws, legislation. In most of the countries, you need to be or a company or a not-for-profit. So in the UK, in Jordan, in Spain, in the US, there are already new legislations to stimulate these new hybrid organizations.
Great, and Konstanze.
I just wanted to say, I was not arguing for being a not-for-profit. I was just saying, for-profit, great, but just also there's the next step, beyond that.
So we're almost out of time. I just want to ask each of you to sort of end by giving your vision for scaling up over the next 5 years for your organization, and to highlight the one challenge that you're wrestling with most, and where you may like help from the crowdsourcing from the audience here, or people on the web or whatever. I'm going to start with you, Naif. We're just going to move down. I'm going to finish with Konstanze, who can talk a bit about the scaling up opportunity for Ashoka and what the challenges Ashoka faces. But let's start with you.
Sure. So whenever you do something new, whenever something new goes into your body, the white blood cells attack. It doesn't matter if it's good for you or bad for you. That's just what happens. And there are some people in societies that have nominated themselves the white blood cells of society that'll attack anything new or foreign. And so we had challenges initially for the people who thought we shouldn't be doing what we were doing. We had them in Saudi to begin with, but that's been solved, and now we have them in America, where the right wing came after us recently. So, but basically for us, scaling is about licensing. The 99 is out in 12 languages. We just sold the rights in France and Malaysia recently. There's a bank in the region that's launching the 99 credit cards and ATM cards. I'm going to be carrying one. I don't care if it's for kids. But basically, for us, we have one theme park. There could be more. Europe is a place where, even though the only two territories in Europe that have bought the show right now are Ireland and Turkey. So there's, we're still looking for broadcasters in the UK and France and Germany, etc. We sold it. South America had sold, the US had sold, Asia had sold, so Europe is the last remaining place for us. So if there's anybody out there that can help us scale in Europe, we'd appreciate it. Thanks.
And then at Vodafone, what's your ambition for the foundation over the next 5 years, the institute over the next 5 years?
Yeah, for the foundation, of course, we have some very concrete projects. One is we haven't talked about is what we call the Moyo Challenge. So where we have in Tanzania some specific disease, which is a fistula for women, which we want to get rid of. And this is a fairly small amount of money necessary actually to ban this fistula from Earth. So this is a kind of a very concrete project for us for the next year. But beyond that, for us as Vodafone, it's really to bring communication to all people of the world, to give them a voice, to bring them the internet, and to build a platform for what we are talking here about. And that's really transforming the society, transforming the world, and making it a little bit better.
Great. Casey, your ambition for the next 5 years and biggest challenge?
So for us, it's really about changing hearts and minds. It's really about bringing the couchsurfing vision to more and more people. And we do that through, we're going to be doing that in the next few years, using software, using our website, and really trying to figure out how do you make this appealing to a larger and larger number of people. When I would say, speaking of like demographics, a lot of people, there's so many people that know about couchsurfing, but when you say, hey, would you do that? They're like, I'm not sure if I would do that. We have some brand awareness issues that we need to work on, that staying on a couch is not just literally staying on a couch. It's more of a metaphor for participating in someone's life and having some exciting life-changing experiences. So there's going to be a little bit of branding for us. So software, branding, and really supporting our local communities, really finding more ways to, all of our local ambassadors who are all over the world, and creating events every day, hundreds of events every day, just finding more ways in which we can support them. So I think those are going to be our keys to our scale.
Rodrigo.
So we started 1 year ago our first social business, what we call CDI Internet Cafes. So community internet cafes in Brazil is really a phenomenon in a lot of countries. So we created CDI Internet Cafes, and we began to affiliate through a conduct code internet cafes who want to be a triple bottom line organization. And now we have 6,500 community internet cafes affiliated in the CDI Internet Cafes who mobilize more than 1 million users per month as a user of this community internet cafe. So that's something new, and we are learning a lot in this new process and a new level of scalability. And also what we are calling CDI mobility, the adaptation of our methodology to operate with social media, smartphones, and tablets. That's one important innovation. We're really very excited about that.
Great, so last word to you, Konstanze.
Yeah, what we certainly want to do is change and accelerate the field of social entrepreneurship. And one important thing we need to do there is really draw on the lessons that we are learning here and from these fellows, and be able to, act on them and feed them back into the field. And I mean, there are more social entrepreneurs in the audience. There's Bridge Kotari over there who uses subtitling to improve literacy. There's Boris Heckler with Parliament Watch. There is Sascha Haselmeier who helps cities access global intelligence. So Raoul Krauthausen there, who is, offering anyone access to information about barrier-free living and walking and moving around. And Eric Dawson, who works with children and empowers them to have empathy and promote peace. So we have this bird's eye view on all that. So we want to distill the principles and be able to feed them back, make them available for everyone. And technology will play a very important role in all that. And what just became clear to me over the last days, because technology is, so global and really leverages you, I think what we'll see is that technology will become relevant to social entrepreneurs who've just nothing to do with it at first view, just nothing to do with it. But they will all need technology to scale.
Great, and if anyone wants to see my take on this subject, I've written an article called A Capital Curve for a Better World, which looks at how do we create a sort of a system of getting the right money to the right stage of the development of a social entrepreneurial organization, and that's in Innovations magazine, and I will tweet it a bit later, a link to it at Matt Bish, so M-A-T-T-B-I-S-H. So I'd like to thank the panel for giving us a very broad tour of some of the issues that they're facing and for giving us a vision and for trying to change the world and make it a better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.